And vanquishing your enemies every day is also fascist, but it's on a different time scale. Where were you in the Middle East?
My dad. Very different.
Yeah.
Introduction to the place for a complete beginner. So.
Yeah, no, his book. You mean Gates?
If the Ukrainians hadn't resisted, everybody would then appeased, and this would be a much more fascist and dangerous world than it is now. But by resisting, they gave us a chance not to appease, and they're still giving us that chance the entire time. So that particular analogy, I think, is helpful. That we're in we're so to speak 3 years into 1938. That Ukrainians are keeping us there. They're keeping us out of 1939. But if we drop the ball, if we don't support them, if we let them lose, then, you know, not that it will be exactly the same, but then I think we can expect a much greater conflict.
Dictatorship with resources like Putin's can always pay for, you know.
In order to convince his most powerful ally.
Yeah, I'm not going to give the Ukrainians.
Any serious historian is going to say that wars are unpredictable and that victories in war are pretty much never what you expect, for better or for worse. And of course, in a moral sense, it's up for the Ukrainians to decide when they think it's no longer worth fighting or what a victory is. I think if you're a Westerner, you have to concentrate on what you can do to make some kind of Ukrainian victory possible. And to repeat myself, there's just a very obvious strategic question, which the Trump people, for whatever reason, don't seem to be able to face, which is that in order for Ukraine to win, you have to help Ukraine. In order for Russia to lose, you have to make things harder for Russia. You can't just kind of wish for it.
To repeat myself, there's just a very obvious strategic question, which the Trump people do when Russia made a big deal about it, but by the end they weren't. And it would be a shame if the Trump people had...
If you want to have a safe Europe, you have to have a strong Ukraine. So if there's a ceasefire, that is then Europe's hour. And if Europe doesn't act in that hour, then things are going to get much worse, not just for Ukraine, but for Europe, because you're then facing the situation of a Russia that's had a pause, starting the war again, and the United States being completely absent.
Never what you expect, for better or for worse. And of course, in a moral sense, it's up for the Ukrainians to decide.
War is about making the other side's political system break. And dictatorships look like they're very strong, and then it turns out they're very brittle. Whereas democracies can take hits and hits and hits, and nevertheless, they can look worse and still end up surviving longer.
It's all about victory and about them personally. I think if you were trying to get towards peace...
You know, Russia's economy is as big as, whatever, Belgium and the Netherlands together, and Ukraine is as big as, like, you know, take an American state, and not even a big one. So these are like relatively small economies, and we in the big economies are looking and saying, oh, who's going to crack first? Whereas in fact, it depends on what we do economically and the choices that we make.
What does a Ukrainian victory at this point in the war look like?
If you listen to the propaganda of nuclear power and do whatever they say, that means that nuclear bluffing works. And if nuclear bluffing works, that means that everybody should have nuclear weapons, either so they can do nuclear bluffs themselves, or so that they can defend themselves against nuclear bluffing. The second point, and related, if you want there not to be a nuclear war, you need Ukraine to win. Because if Ukraine loses the war, then the lesson that the whole world learns is countries that have nuclear weapons are going to win conventional wars, and therefore the only way to stop conventional wars is to have a nuclear weapon yourself.